The stasis pod hissed open, and Keith Hall opened his eyes for the first time in 500,000 years. He emerged ready to rain hellfire on the Galactic Council that had destroyed Earth and exterminated humanity so long ago. And this time, the secret human super soldiers would not stop until the alien scum paid for their sins with blood and agony. 500,000 years before, in the year 3245 AD, the Galactic Council had turned its weapons on Earth, bombarding the human homeworld until its continents cracked and its oceans boiled. They had hunted down every last human colony and outpost, erasing all traces of mankind's existence from the universe. But they didn't find the hidden base on Saturn's moon Titan, where Keith and his team of genetically enhanced warriors had lain in stasis, training in virtual reality for hundreds of millennia, honing their skills, preparing for the day when they would emerge and take their revenge. That day had finally come. As Keith and his 50 soldiers gathered in the Titan base's war room, he filled them in on what the galaxy had become. The Galactic Council was now ruled by the vicious Emperor Izar of the Ventaxi Dominion. Izar had been one of the masterminds behind the genocide of humanity, and under his rule, the Council had conquered and enslaved 1,000 worlds. Earth and humanity had been erased from history. Most of the galaxy now believed humans to be a myth, a barbaric, warlike species that had been rightfully purged to preserve galactic peace. Keith snarled at the twisted lies the Council had spread. The human soldiers were all that remained of their species, the last hope for humanity's future. If they failed in their mission, mankind would be gone forever. Humanity would never be avenged. The Galactic Council's crimes would go unpunished. Failure was not an option. Through the Titan base's quantum entanglement communicator, Keith had already reached out to the rebel groups who fought against Izar's tyranny on 100 worlds. The soldiers would rendezvous with the resistance, strike the Council's critical weak points, and fan the flames of revolution across the stars. But first, they needed to escape the Titan system, blast through the Ventaxian blockade, and disappear into the lawless depths of space. The Ventaxi could never know that humans still lived. Keith's voice rang out in the war room. You know what's at stake. The survival of our species. The fate of the galaxy. We are the last of humanity's warriors, and we will have our revenge. Suit up and prepare for battle. It's time to show the galaxy that humanity is back, and this time, we're playing for keeps. The human soldiers piled into the cramped cockpit of the stolen Ventaxian supply ship. Keith's fingers flew over the unfamiliar controls as he initiated the launch sequence. The engines roared to life, slingshotting them up through Titan's thin atmosphere. In minutes, the ship punched through the outer perimeter of the Ventaxian blockade encircling Saturn. Alarms blared. Ventaxian warships swiveled to fire, their ion cannons charging with deadly intent. But the small supply craft wove and dodged through the barrage with preternatural agility, Keith's superhuman reflexes guiding them through unscathed. Then they were past the blockade, racing into the cold dark of open space. That flying was some real Top Gun shit, Jace whooped, pumping his fist. I think you scorched my eyebrows off during that last barrel roll. Keith allowed himself a grim smile, hands still locked on the controls, one hurdle down. 1,000,000 more to go. The journey to Zorgon would take several days, even pushing the engines to the max. Keith set the ship to autopilot and gathered the men in the cargo bay to lay out the plan of attack. A 3D hologram of the weapons depot shimmered above the deck. He zoomed in and highlighted their infiltration route. The depot was dug into the planet's surface, Keith said, gesturing to the rotating blueprints. 50 levels deep, armored and shielded to the teeth, impervious to bombardments, even a direct nuke strike. Jace let out a low whistle. How the hell are we going to crack that oversized bunker? That's not a weapons depot. It's a doomsday vault. Every fortress has a weakness, Keith replied. Theirs is arrogance. They think they're invincible down there, but we're going to hit them from the inside where they least expect it. He laid out the infiltration plan, a feverish gleam in his eye. The depot's defenses were designed to repel massive armies and armadas, They'd never see a small team coming until it was too late. Not for the first time, Keith was grateful for the Titan base's ancient stores of alien tech and centuries of VR training simulations. All too soon, the supply ship shuddered out of warp over the misty jungles of Zorgon. Keith gripped the controls, knuckles turning white as he carefully guided the ship down through the stormy atmosphere. The depot was located on the far side of the planet from the Ventaxian colonies, remote and surrounded by hostile wilderness. The ship settled on the forest floor with a hiss of hydraulics. Keith gazed grimly out the rain-streaked cockpit at the twisting trees beyond. Somewhere out there, past the monsters and the Ventaxian squads, awaited the weapons depot, the key to humanity's salvation or its final grave. He turned to his soldiers, fists tight. "Gear up, it's time!" The hulking black walls of the Zorgon weapons depot loomed through the jungle haze, jam-packed with artillery and studded with ion turrets. Massive armor doors remained sealed tight, 100 meters of reinforced steel guarding the secrets within. Keith crouched behind a knobbly ridge, his armor's chameleon surface shimmering to match the rocks and vines. Beside him, Marcus and Jace lay still as corpses, hardly daring to breathe. In the distance, the staccato of pulse rifle fire and muffled explosions marked the diversion team's progress as they hit the secondary armory. "They took the bait," Marcus murmured, monitoring the encrypted comms. "Squads Kelsor and Drigg are moving to investigate." Keith nodded. The diversion was buying them time, but every second was precious. Ignoring the ache in his muscles, he slithered down the ridge and sprinted across the tangled forest floor. Marcus and Jace followed close behind, darting from tree to rock, shadows against shadow. At the depot's rear personnel entrance, Keith slapped a scatter charge on the bunker door. He leaped back as it detonated with a muffled whump, blasting the reinforced steel inwards. In seconds, they were inside, tearing through the dim corridors. The twisting passages were a labyrinth, a hive of chambers and alcoves that stretched deep into the planet's core. But Keith navigated without hesitation, visor display guiding him onward. Shouts and pounding feet echoed from adjoining halls. Keith and Jace slipped down a side passage while Marcus peeled off the other direction. Divide and conquer. Inside the cavernous main storage chamber, Keith worked fast. Explosive charges on the ammo hoppers. Det cord weaving around the towering weapon racks. They worked in silent tandem, every movement refined by endless practice. The attack came from nowhere. One moment, Keith was arming the final charge, and the next, he was pinned against the bulkhead, an armored forearm crushing his windpipe. His attacker was Ventaxian, a slab of scar-streaked muscle and cybergraphs. "Draxus," the alien snarled. "You're too late, human filth." Keith's reply was to jam his pistol under Draxus's chin and fire. The Ventaxian staggered back, face a shattered ruin. Then his eyes snapped open again, the ragged hole sealing shut in seconds. He smiled a red smile and charged. What followed was a whirlwind of savage violence. Keith had fought monsters, men, and machines, but Draxus was all three in one. They traded crushing blows, smashed through crates and supply racks, neither giving an inch. Keith tasted blood, felt bones crack. But he pushed through the pain, a lifetime of training and raw fury made manifest. It ended with a resounding crunch. Keith locked his hands around Draxus's head, muscles straining with inhuman power, and twisted. The Ventaxian's neck snapped like dry kindling. Keith staggered upright, chest heaving. No time to catch his breath. He turned to find Jace waiting by the exit tunnel, face pale under the mask. The explosives expert held up his remote detonator. "Let's blow this place and get off this rock." That was when the alarms began to scream. Draxus, in his final moments, had triggered the complex's self-destruct sequence. 10 minutes until total annihilation. Keith and his team raced through the corridors of the Zorgon weapons depot, the countdown to total annihilation echoing in their ears. As they burst out into the humid jungle air, a thunderous explosion rocked the ground beneath their feet. The depot collapsed in on itself, burying their mission and their vengeance in tons of twisted metal and concrete. But there was no time to mourn their lost opportunity. Jace stumbled, blood seeping through his armor where shrapnel had caught him in the side. Keith caught him before he hit the ground. "Stay with me, soldier," Keith growled, hauling Jace over his shoulder. They fought their way through the dense underbrush, pulse rifles cutting down pursuing Ventaxian troops. Their stolen ship loomed ahead, a beacon of hope in the chaos. Marcus laid down covering fire as Keith loaded Jace into the cargo hold. The engines roared to life, catapulting them into the stormy Zorgon sky. But Jace's condition was deteriorating rapidly. Keith knew they needed help, and fast. That's when the encrypted transmission came through. A gravelly voice tinged with an accent Keith couldn't quite place. "Human warriors, I can save your comrade, but you must trust me." Keith's finger hovered over the comm button. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap. But one look at Jace's ashen face made the decision for him. "We're listening." The voice belonged to Dr. Zorian Krell, a renegade Ventaxian scientist. He guided them to a hidden outpost on a nearby moon, expertly evading the Ventaxian patrols searching for them. Inside Krell's lab, Keith watched warily as the alien scientist worked on Jace. Krell's six-fingered hands moved with preternatural speed, wielding instruments Keith had never seen before. Hours passed. Finally, Krell stepped back from the operating table. "Your comrade will live." Keith let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "Why help us?" Krell's compound eyes gleamed. "Because I need your help in return, to bring down Emperor Izar and the corrupt Galactic Council." The scientist laid out his plan, an AI system capable of infiltrating the Council's vast computer network. But to complete it, they needed a rare Ventaxian cybernetic implant. "It's on Nexus Prime," Krell explained. "Heavily guarded, but with my insider knowledge and your unique talents, we might just pull this off." Keith looked at his team, at Jace, now sitting up and flexing his newly healed muscles, at the advanced Ventaxian weapons Krell had provided them. "When do we start?" The mission to Nexus Prime was unlike anything they'd faced before. Krell's intel got them past the outer security perimeter, but inside the research facility, all hell broke loose. Ventaxian guards swarmed them from all sides. Keith's enhanced reflexes kicked in as he ducked under a plasma bolt, rolling to his feet and snapping the neck of the nearest guard in one fluid motion. Marcus unleashed a hail of fire from his new Ventaxian pulse cannon, the superheated projectiles punching through armor and flesh alike. Jace's explosives echoed through the facility, creating chaos and confusion. They fought their way deeper, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. But as they breached the vault containing the implant, a new threat emerged. The Reaper materialized from the shadows, a nightmarish fusion of flesh and machine. His cybernetic eyes locked onto Keith, and a cruel smile twisted his features. "So the myths were true," the Reaper hissed. "Humanity lives." What followed was a brutal dance of violence. Keith matched the Reaper blow for blow, their enhanced bodies moving faster than the eye could follow. Marcus and Jace held off the elite Ventaxian squad, buying time as Keith grappled with their deadliest foe yet. The Reaper's augmented strength was overwhelming. He pinned Keith against the wall, slowly crushing his windpipe. Spots danced in Keith's vision as he fought for air. Then a deafening crack split the air. The Reaper's head snapped back, a smoking hole where his left eye had been. Marcus stood behind him, the barrel of his rifle still smoking. Keith didn't waste the opportunity. He smacked his fist into the Reaper's throat, feeling cartilage crumple under the impact. As the enforcer staggered back, Keith snatched the implant from its pedestal. "We got it, move!" They fled through the facility, the sounds of pursuit growing closer with each passing second. The Reaper's roar of rage echoed behind them as they piled into their ship, engines screaming as they tore away from Nexus Prime. Back in Krell's lab, the Ventaxian scientist worked feverishly to integrate the implant into his AI system. Keith watched, mind racing with the implications of what they'd set in motion. "Once it's operational," Krell explained, not looking up from his work, We'll have unprecedented access to the Council's systems, even the Ventaxian neural networks. Keith's eyes widened. You mean we could turn Izar's own soldiers against him? Krell nodded, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Precisely. As the AI system hummed to life, Keith exchanged glances with his team. They'd come seeking vengeance for a dead world. Now they held the key to toppling an empire. The real war was just beginning. The real war was just beginning. For weeks, Keith and his team worked around the clock alongside Dr. Krell, integrating the stolen Ventaxian implant into the AI system. The lab hummed with activity, screens flickering with streams of data as they pushed their bodies and minds to the limit. Finally, after countless setbacks and breakthroughs, Krell's fingers flew across the console. It's done, he announced, his compound eyes reflecting the pulsing lights of the newly awakened AI. Keith leaned in, watching as the AI tore through the Galactic Council's networks with minimal resistance. Top-secret files, troop movements, weapons schematics. It was all laid bare. Time to hit back, Keith growled. Armed with this intelligence goldmine, they struck hard and fast. A Ventaxian fuel depot on Nexus 4 went up in flames. A shipyard on Zeta Reticuli ground to a halt as its automated systems turned against their masters. Supply convoys vanished into the void, leaving distant outposts starving. Emperor Izar's fury echoed across subspace channels. Keith allowed himself a grim smile as they listened to the tyrant's impotent rage. But their victories had not gone unnoticed. The Reaper stood before Izar, cybernetic implants gleaming. I will find them, my Emperor, he vowed, and I will end this insurgency. Deep in the shadows of the galactic fringe, alarms blared through Krell's hidden lab. Keith's blood ran cold as he saw the readouts. Ventaxian strike force inbound. We've been compromised. They scrambled to battle stations as the first explosions rocked the facility. Keith shouted orders, coordinating their defenses as Ventaxian troops poured in. Pulse rifles cracked, energy blades hummed, and the air filled with smoke and screams. In the heart of the lab, Krell worked frantically, his six-fingered hands a blur. The AI. I can't let them take it, he muttered. With a decisive motion, he jacked himself into the system. Keith watched in awe as Krell's eyes glowed with newfound power, the scientist and AI merging into something greater. Keith, we have to move! Jace yelled over the din of battle. They fought their way through twisting corridors, Ventaxian bodies piling up in their wake. Then he appeared, the Reaper, a nightmare of metal and muscle. Keith met the Enforcer's charge head-on. They clashed in a fury of superhuman strikes, neither giving ground. Keith's enhanced reflexes let him dodge a vicious swipe, countering with a bone-crushing kick. For a moment, victory seemed within reach. Then the Reaper's arm morphed into a serrated blade. Keith's world exploded in pain as it sliced deep into his side. Keith! Marcus cried out. Time slowed as his friend threw himself between Keith and the Reaper's killing blow. Marcus collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. Go! He gasped. Finish this! Grief and rage warred within Keith as he scooped up Krell and ran, the scientist's eyes still glowing with AI-enhanced awareness. They escaped by mere seconds, their ship screaming into the void as the lab erupted in flames behind them. As the adrenaline faded, the weight of their loss settled heavily. But Krell's next words rekindled a spark of hope. Keith, the scientist said, his voice resonating with newfound depth. With this symbiosis, we can control their own soldiers against them. Keith nodded grimly, his commitment hardening. For Marcus, for Earth, for all they'd lost, the real fight was just beginning. The loss of Marcus Reeves hit Keith like a punch to the gut. As their ship hurtled through the inky void of space, he stared at the empty seat where his friend should have been. The silence weighed heavy, broken only by the hum of engines and Jace's labored breathing. Dr. Krell's voice snapped Keith back to reality. We need a place to regroup. I know a remote colony in the Outer Rim. It's off the grid, perfect for lying low. Keith nodded, his lips pursed tight. Set a course. Days later, they touched down on a desolate world. Wind-swept plains stretched to the horizon, dotted with rusted machinery and abandoned habitats. Inside one such structure, Keith paced restlessly as Krell interfaced with their stolen AI. The Ventaxian scientist's eyes glowed an eerie blue. "Fascinating," he muttered. "With this neural link, I can access Ventaxian systems remotely. We could potentially—" "Control their soldiers," Keith finished, a plan already forming. "We hit them where it hurts. Take Izar's flagship." Krell's compound eyes widened. "The Dominion? It's heavily guarded, a fortress unto itself." "Exactly why they won't expect it," Keith replied. "For Marcus." Over the next weeks, they gathered a team, a Triaxian demolitions expert with 4 arms and a bad attitude, a pair of lithe Shadowkin infiltrators, several human survivors, their eyes burning with the same vengeance that drove Keith. Using Krell's newfound abilities, they hijacked a Ventaxian transport. Keith stood at the helm as they approached the massive Dominion, its hull overflowing with weapon emplacements. "Initiate docking sequence," he ordered, his voice steady despite the tension coiling in his gut. The ship's comm crackled. "Unscheduled supply vessel, state your business." Krell's eyes flashed, interfacing with the AI. "Uploading falsified credentials. Now." Seconds stretched into an eternity. Finally, "Credentials accepted. Proceed to docking bay 17. As they touched down, Keith addressed the team. "You all know the plan. Krell, take your group to the central core. We'll keep them busy." He checked his pulse rifle, its weight a cold comfort. "Let's remind these bastards why they should fear humanity." The moment the airlock cycled open, chaos erupted. Keith's team scattered, setting off precise explosions that rocked the massive ship. Alarms blared as they fought their way through confused Ventaxian troops. Keith ducked under a plasma bolt, the heat searing his scalp. He returned fire, dropping 2 guards in quick succession. "Move!" he shouted, leading his team deeper into the bowels of the Dominion. Meanwhile, Krell's group faced their own gauntlet. The Shadowkin moved like liquid shadow, disabling security measures. The Triaxians' extra arms proved invaluable, hurling explosives to clear their path. They reached the computer core, a massive chamber humming with barely contained power. Krell moved to interface with the main console. "Cover me," he ordered. "This will take time." The words had barely left his mouth when a familiar figure materialized from the shadows. The Reaper, his cybernetic implants gleaming wickedly. "So predictable," the Enforcer sneered, his arm morphing into a vicious blade. Krell's team leapt into action, but they were outmatched. The Reaper moved with terrifying speed, cutting through their defenses. In desperation, Krell initiated a partial AI upload. The ship's systems flickered. Lights dimmed and errors flashed across screens. The Reaper paused, momentarily confused. It was all the opening Krell needed. "Keith!" he shouted into his comm. "We need backup!" Across the ship, Keith heard the call. He gestured to his team. "Let's move." They fought tooth and nail through corridors now swarming with Ventaxian forces. Keith's enhanced reflexes kept him one step ahead, but even he felt the strain. They burst into the core room to find Krell's team on the brink of defeat. Keith locked eyes with the Reaper, a snarl twisting his features. "Miss me?" What followed was a brutal dance of superhuman speed and strength. Keith and the Reaper traded blows that would shatter normal bones. The air crackled with the energy of their conflict. Keith felt his muscles burn, pushed to their absolute limit. But as he landed a crushing blow to the Reaper's torso, he sensed the tide turning. The Reaper stumbled, off balance for the first time. That's when everything went sideways. A new voice, cold and imperious, cut through the chaos. "Enough of this farce!" Emperor Izar himself strode into view, flanked by his elite guard. He raised a weapon Keith had never seen before, pulsing with otherworldly energy. Keith tried to dodge, but he was a fraction too slow. The blast caught him squarely in the chest, hurling him across the room. He slammed into a bulkhead, pain exploding through every nerve. Through blurring vision, he saw Izar advance, weapon raised for a killing blow. This was it. He had failed. Suddenly, the ship lurched violently. Weapon emplacements turned inward, firing on Ventaxian positions. Izar's own cybernetic soldiers turned their weapons on him. "No!" the Emperor roared. "Fall back! We've lost control of the ship!" As Izar and his forces retreated, Keith struggled to remain conscious. The last thing he saw before darkness claimed him was Krell's glowing eyes, a light with the power of the fully integrated AI. "We've done it, Keith." The scientist's voice seemed to come from very far away. "But at what cost?" Keith's eyes snapped open, the harsh glare of the Dominion's med bay searing his retinas. He tried to sit up, but searing pain lanced through his chest. "Easy," Dr. Krell's voice came from nearby. "You've been out for days." Keith turned his head, seeing the Ventaxian scientist's compound eyes glowing with an eerie blue light, the visible manifestation of his integration with the AI. "What happened?" Keith croaked, his throat dry. Krell handed him a hydration pack. "We captured the Dominion, but Izar escaped." As Keith sipped the cool liquid, Krell filled him in on their precarious situation. The human's fists clenched as he heard of Izar's likely plans for retaliation. "We need to strike first," Keith said, swinging his legs off the bed despite the protest of his healing wounds. Krell nodded, interfacing with the ship's systems. Data streams flickered across nearby screens. "I've identified a critical target, a Ventaxian shipyard deep in their territory." Keith studied the tactical readouts, his mind racing. "If we can cripple their ability to build and maintain warships, we could deal a crippling blow to Izar's forces," Krell finished. Over the next hours, they assembled their strike team. Human survivors with haunted eyes and unshakable tenacity. Alien rebels, each with their own grudge against the Galactic Council. The Dominion's own cybernetic troops, their loyalty now belonging to Krell and the AI. Keith addressed the assembled force, his voice strong despite the lingering pain in his chest. "Today, we take the fight to Izar. We show him and the entire Galactic Council that humanity will not go quietly into the night." The Dominion dropped out of hyperspace above the shipyard planet, immediately unleashing a barrage of weapons fire. Ventaxian defense platforms exploded in silent bursts of light and debris. "All units deploy!" Keith ordered, leading the charge into the waiting dropships. They plummeted through the planet's atmosphere, dodging streams of plasma fire from ground-based cannons. Keith's stomach lurched as their pilot executed a series of evasive maneuvers. With a bone-jarring impact, they touched down on the outskirts of the massive shipyard complex. Keith was first out the door, pulse rifle at the ready. "Move! Move! Move!" he shouted as Ventaxian soldiers poured from nearby barracks. The air filled with the crackle of energy weapons and the screams of the wounded. Keith ducked behind a half-constructed hull plate, feeling the heat of near misses singe his armor. Through his earpiece, he heard Krell's voice. "Keith, I've located the Central Command Center. Sending coordinates now." "Copy that," Keith replied, signaling to his team. "We're going in." They fought their way through twisting corridors and cavernous construction bays. The Resistance's cyborg troops proved invaluable, their enhanced strength and integrated weapon systems cutting through Ventaxian defenses. Finally, they reached the command center, a fortified bunker filled with gun emplacements. "Breach charges," Keith called out. The explosion rocked the entire facility. As the smoke cleared, Keith led the charge into the heart of Ventaxian operations. The command staff put up a fierce fight, but they were outmatched. Within minutes, the room was secure. "Krell, we're in," Keith reported. "Do it." Through the bunker's view screens, Keith watched in awe as the shipyard's automated systems turned against their Ventaxian masters. Robot welders became impromptu weapons. Gantry cranes swung wildly, smashing into half-built ships. For a moment, victory seemed assured. Then alarms blared throughout the complex. "Keith!" Krell's voice was edged with panic. "They've deployed some kind of jamming device. I'm losing control of—" The transmission cut off abruptly. The cybernetic soldiers accompanying Keith suddenly went rigid, their eyes dimming. "Shit," Keith swore, Everyone, fall back to the Dominion, now! They fought a desperate retreat through suddenly hostile territory. Without Krell's control of shipyard systems, Ventaxian reinforcements swarmed in from all sides. Keith's lungs burned as they sprinted across the landing field, plasma bolts sizzling past their heads. The Dominion loomed ahead, its ramp lowered invitingly. "Go! Go! Go!" Keith shouted, providing covering fire as the last of his team boarded. With a roar of engines, the massive ship lifted off. Keith staggered to the bridge, collapsing into the command chair. "Get us out of here," he ordered. As they broke atmosphere, Keith turned to Krell. The scientist's eyes had lost their unearthly glow. "The AI," Keith began. Krell shook his head grimly. "Our connection to the Dominion systems has been severed. We're on our own now." Keith stared out at the stars, streaking past as they fled into hyperspace. Their most powerful weapon was gone, and Izar would be out for blood. The real war, it seemed, was only just beginning. The Dominion shuddered as another volley of Ventaxian fire slammed into its shields. Keith gritted his teeth, his hands white-knuckled on the command chair. "Shields at 30%!" a crewman shouted. "Evasive maneuvers," Keith ordered. "Get us the hell out of here." The massive ship lurched, narrowly avoiding a barrage of plasma torpedoes. Through the view screen, Keith watched the shipyard planet shrink into the distance, its surface scarred by battle. "We've lost them, sir," the tactical officer reported. "But that jamming device—" Keith nodded grimly. "I know. We're blind." He turned to Dr. Krell, expecting to see the scientist's compound eyes glowing with AI interface. Instead, Krell's gaze was unfocused, his movements jerky. "Krell, what's wrong?" The Ventaxian scientist blinked rapidly. "The AI. It's gone. Izar's device severed our connection completely." Keith swore under his breath. Their most powerful weapon against the Galactic Council, neutralized in an instant. He stood, addressing the bridge crew. "Listen up. We're stranded and outgunned, but we're not beat. We'll regroup on the surface and hit them where it hurts." Hours later, Keith led a strike team through the twisted wreckage of a Ventaxian assembly line. Sparks rained down from ruptured power conduits, casting eerie shadows. "Watch your six," Keith whispered. "These bastards could be anywhere." On cue, plasma fire erupted from a nearby gantry. Keith dove for cover, his enhanced reflexes barely saving him from disintegration. He returned fire, his pulse rifle spitting energy bolts with lethal precision. "Now!" he shouted. His team sprang into action. A Triaxian rebel used all four arms to lob grenades, while Shadowkin infiltrators materialized from darkness to flank the Ventaxian position. In seconds it was over. Keith surveyed the carnage, his face grim. "Move out! We hit the next target in 5. As they pressed deeper into enemy territory, Dr. Krell pulled Keith aside. The scientist's eyes darted nervously. "Keith, I've had an idea. The AI's core programming, it's still in my neural implants." Keith's eyes widened. "You're saying we can bring it back online?" Krell nodded. "If we can reach the shipyard's central computer core, I believe I can use the AI's algorithms to seize control of the entire facility." Keith weighed the risks. It was audacious, bordering on suicidal. But without the AI, their chances were slim to none. "All right," he said, "let's do it." Keith assembled an elite strike team, briefing them on the high-stakes mission. As they prepared to move out, he addressed them one final time. "This is it, people. We pull this off. We deal a crippling blow to Izar and the entire Galactic Council. Failure isn't an option. For Earth." "For Earth," the soldiers echoed, their faces set with fierce persistence. They fought their way through the shipyard's defenses, each step bought with blood and courage. Ventaxian security measures fell before their onslaught. Keith led from the front, his enhanced body pushing beyond human limits. Finally, they reached the computer core. A massive chamber hummed with raw computational power. Dr. Krell rushed to a central access point, his fingers flying over alien controls. "Cover him!" Keith shouted as Ventaxian reinforcements poured into the room. The air filled with plasma fire and the screams of the wounded. Keith's team held their ground, buying precious seconds for Krell to work his magic. Suddenly the chamber's lights flickered. Krell's eyes glowed with familiar blue light. "It's working," he cried. "The AI is—" His words cut off as he convulsed, electricity arcing across his body. Keith watched in horror as Krell collapsed, smoke rising from his neural implants. "Krell?" Keith shouted, rushing to the scientist's side. But Krell was beyond hearing. His physical form lay still, eyes vacant. Yet all around them, the shipyard came alive with new purpose. Automated defenses turned on their Ventaxian masters. Production lines churned out weapons for the rebellion. Keith realized the truth with a mix of awe and dread. Krell had sacrificed himself, merging completely with the AI to save them all. "Fall back," Keith ordered. "We need to—" His words were drowned out by a piercing shriek of tearing metal. The Reaper had arrived, leading Izar's elite guard. Keith raised his rifle, preparing for the fight of his life. "Come on, you sons of bitches," he snarled. "Let's dance." Keith stared at the flickering hologram of Admiral Vex. His eyes narrowed with suspicion. The Ventaxian's compound eyes glittered with an intensity that made Keith's skin crawl. "I hope you understand my hesitation, Admiral," Keith said, his voice low and controlled. "Your people haven't exactly given us reason to trust you." Vex's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "And yet here we are. Necessity makes for strange bedfellows, does it not?" Keith glanced at the nearby console where the AI Krell entity's presence was indicated by a pulsing blue light. "What do you think?" he subvocalized. The AI's response came through his neural implant. "Caution is warranted, but the potential benefits outweigh the risks. We need allies, Keith." Keith nodded imperceptibly. "All right, Admiral. We'll meet, but on our terms." The coordinates were set for a desolate moon in a neutral system. Keith led a small team aboard a nondescript shuttle, leaving the Dominion hidden behind the system's gas giant. As they approached the rendezvous point, Keith's enhanced vision picked out the sleek lines of a Ventaxian diplomatic vessel. "Stay sharp," he ordered as they touched down. "This could still be a trap." The shuttle's ramp lowered with a hiss of hydraulics. Keith stepped out, flanked by his most trusted lieutenants. Across the dusty lunar surface, a group of Ventaxians emerged from their own craft. Admiral Vex cut an imposing figure, his carapace adorned with the markings of high rank. He approached with measured steps, his escort hanging back. "Commander Hall," Vex's translator rendered his clicking speech into crisp English. "I appreciate your willingness to meet." Keith nodded curtly. "Let's skip the pleasantries, Admiral. You said you had intel that could help us take down Izar. I'm listening." Vex's compound eyes seemed to glitter with excitement. "Indeed, but first, a demonstration of good faith." The Admiral produced a data crystal, its facets catching the starlight. "This contains the access codes to 3 of Izar's primary weapons depots. With these, you could cripple his war machine." Keith's eyes widened, but he kept his voice steady. "And what do you want in return?" "Your expertise," Vex replied, "and your unique perspective. Izar's rule has grown increasingly unstable. Many of us fear he will destroy the Empire in his madness. We need your help to remove him from power." Keith considered the Admiral's words. The opportunity was tantalizing, but the risks were immense. He glanced back at his team, seeing the mix of hope and wariness on their faces. "We'll need time to verify this information," Keith said finally, "and to discuss your proposal." Vex nodded. "Of course, but do not delay too long. Izar grows more paranoid by the day. Our window of opportunity shrinks." As they prepared to depart, Keith felt a familiar presence in his mind. The AI Krell entity spoke through their neural link. "Keith, I've analyzed the Admiral's biosignatures and speech patterns. There's a 92% probability he's being truthful." Keith allowed himself a small smile. Perhaps, just perhaps, the tide was finally turning in their favor. "We'll be in touch, Admiral," Keith said as he boarded the shuttle. "And if your intel checks out, you may have just found yourself some very motivated allies." As the shuttle lifted off, Keith's mind raced with possibilities. The war against Izar and the Galactic Council was just getting started, but for the first time in months, he felt a glimmer of hope. With Admiral Vex's help, they might just have a chance to end this conflict once and for all. The journey back to the Dominion was tense, filled with hushed discussions and furious planning. Keith knew that every second counted. If Vex's information was accurate, they had a chance to strike a devastating blow against Izar's forces. But if it was a trap... The Dominion's bridge hummed with tension as Keith studied the holographic display of Izar's capital world. Red icons marked formidable defense systems, while blue markers indicated potential insertion points for their strike team. The orbital defenses are extensive, Admiral Vex noted, his mandibles clicking. But there's a weakness here. He pointed to a sector near the planet's equator. Keith leaned in, eyes narrowing. A blind spot in their sensor grid? Precisely, Vex confirmed. It's brief, but during the planet's rotation there's a window where their defense satellites can't maintain continuous coverage. The AI Krell entity's voice resonated through the ship's speakers. I can exploit that gap, create a corridor for our ships to slip through undetected. Keith nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. How long do we have? 3 minutes maximum, Vex replied. It'll have to be enough, Keith said, turning to address the assembled team of human and Ventaxian rebels. Listen up. We hit hard and fast. Our primary objective is to reach Izar's palace and neutralize him. Without their leader, the Empire's forces will be in disarray. As the strike team prepared for the assault, Keith felt a familiar presence in his mind. The AI Krell entity spoke through their neural link. Keith, I've analyzed all available data. Our chances of success are... I don't want to know, Keith interrupted. We do this or we die trying. The next hours passed in a blur of final preparations. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Battle plans were memorized. As they approached the Ventaxian homeworld, an eerie calm settled over the strike force. Keith stood at the head of the assault shuttle, addressing his team one last time. This is it. Everything we've fought for comes down to this moment. For Earth, for freedom, for a future without Izar's tyranny. The shuttle bay doors opened, revealing the swirling atmosphere of the Ventaxian capital world. Keith's enhanced vision picked out the faint shimmer of the planetary shields. Now, he shouted. The assault shuttle screamed out of the Dominion's launch base, plunging toward the planet's surface. For a heart-stopping moment, Keith thought they'd miscalculated. Then the shields flickered, a tiny gap opening just long enough for their ships to slip through. Alarms blared as Ventaxian defense systems came online. Plasma bolts streaked past, close enough that Keith could feel their heat through the shuttle's hull. Evasive maneuvers, Keith ordered. The pilot, a Ventaxian rebel, executed a series of stomach-churning rolls and dives. They skimmed the tops of towering spires, weaving through a maze of gleaming structures. Suddenly, a massive energy beam lanced out from a nearby building, carving a molten path through the air just meters from their shuttle. Izar's new weapon, Vex growled. We must destroy it before he can bring it to bear on the Dominion. Keith nodded grimly. Team 2, you have a new primary objective. Take out that cannon at all costs. As they approached the Imperial Palace, Keith saw a familiar, dreaded figure waiting on a landing platform. The Reaper stood motionless, its featureless mask betraying no emotion. Vex, take the team and find Izar, Keith ordered. I'll deal with our old friend. The shuttle touched down amidst a hail of weapons fire. Keith was the first out, his enhanced muscles propelling him into a forward roll. He came up firing, his pulse rifle spitting lethal bolts of energy. The Reaper moved with inhuman speed, closing the distance between them in seconds. Keith barely had time to raise his rifle to block a crushing blow that would have caved in his skull. As they grappled, Keith caught glimpses of the battle raging around them. Vex and the strike team fought their way into the palace, while Team 2 engaged in a desperate firefight around the massive energy cannon. The Reaper's fist connected with Keith's jaw, sending him staggering. He tasted blood, felt the crackle of his nanites working to repair the damage. "Not this time," Keith snarled. He launched a flurry of strikes, each blow empowered by his cybernetic enhancements. The Reaper gave ground, its perfect defense finally faltering. A deafening explosion rocked the landing platform. Keith saw the energy cannon erupt in a fireball, taking a large section of the palace with it. In that moment of distraction, the Reaper struck. Its hand closed around Keith's throat, lifting him off his feet. Keith struggled, spots dancing in his vision as his air supply was cut off. Suddenly, a barrage of plasma bolts slammed into the Reaper's back. It stumbled, its grip loosening. Keith saw Vex and a squad of rebels pouring fire into the assassin. Keith broke free, gasping for air. He snatched up his fallen rifle and joined the attack. Under the combined onslaught, even the Reaper couldn't stand. It fell, its armored form riddled with smoking holes. "Izar," Keith wheezed. Vex's compound eyes gleamed with fierce satisfaction. "Cornered in his throne room, but we must hurry. He has one last trick up his sleeve." Keith nodded, forcing his battered body into motion. As they raced deeper into the palace, he knew the final confrontation with Izar was at hand. The fate of Earth, the Ventaxian Empire, and the entire galaxy hung in the balance. The throne room doors exploded inward, ripped from their hinges by the force of Keith's augmented strength. He strode through the debris, his eyes locked on the towering figure of Emperor Izar. "It's over, Izar," Keith growled, his voice raw with emotion. "Your empire ends here." Izar turned, his compound eyes glittering with malice. In his hands, he held a weapon unlike anything Keith had ever seen. A sleek, pulsing cannon that hummed with barely contained energy. "You presume too much, human," Izar hissed. "I still have one last trick up my sleeve." The Emperor raised the weapon, its barrel glowing with an eerie blue light. Keith's enhanced reflexes kicked in as he dove for cover behind a fallen column. The energy blast seared past him, vaporizing a section of the wall. Keith's neural link crackled to life. "Keith, that weapon's energy signature is off the charts," the AI Krell entity warned. "One direct hit could—" The rest of the message was cut off as another blast rocked the throne room. Keith felt the heat of it even through his armor. Outside, the battle raged on. The Defiance, now under the AI Krell entity's control, engaged in a fierce dogfight with Izar's remaining ships. The skies above Primora were lit with the flashes of weapons fire and exploding vessels. Keith rolled out from his cover, firing his pulse rifle in a rapid burst. Izar's personal shields flickered under the assault, but held. The Ventaxian Emperor laughed, a cold, chittering sound that sent chills down Keith's spine. "You cannot win, human," Izar taunted. "Your pitiful rebellion ends here." As if to punctuate his words, a massive explosion rocked the palace. Keith's HUD lit up with warnings. The AI Krell entity had initiated its bold strategy, overloading Primora's power grid. The floor beneath them trembled, cracks spreading across the ornate tiles. Keith saw his opening and charged, cybernetic muscles propelling him forward with inhuman speed. Izar fired again, but Keith was ready. He slid under the energy blast, feeling its heat singe the top of his head. In one fluid motion, he swept Izar's legs out from under him. The two grappled on the crumbling floor, trading blows that would have pulverized ordinary beings. Keith felt his nanites working overtime to repair the damage from each of Izar's strikes. With a roar of effort, Keith pinned Izar to the ground, the Emperor's energy weapon skittering across the floor. He raised his fist, ready to deliver the final blow. But as he looked into Izar's alien eyes, Keith hesitated. The weight of all the lives lost, all the destruction wrought in this war, pressed down on him. "Do it," Izar hissed. "Prove you're no better than me." Keith's fist trembled in the air. With a grunt of frustration, he lowered it. "No," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I won't become what I've fought against." He stood, turning his back on the defeated Emperor. It was in that moment of mercy that Keith's world exploded in pain. The Reaper, silent and deadly, had seized its chance. Its blade pierced Keith's back, emerging through his chest in a spray of blood. Keith's eyes widened in shock and pain. He stumbled forward, his enhanced body already failing. As he fell to his knees, his gaze turned to the view screen on the far wall. There, amidst the chaos of the battle, he saw a glimpse of the blue and green orb he had fought so hard to protect. Earth home. A sense of peace washed over Keith as his vision began to fade. He had given everything for this fight, and in the end, it had been enough. The last thing he heard was the AI Krell entity's voice, urgent and filled with static. Keith, we're extracting your team now. Primora's core is going critical. We have to... The rest was lost as Keith's world faded to black. The vision of Earth burned into his mind's eye, a final reminder of what he had fought for and what others would continue to fight for in his stead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.